What's up? Welcome once again. We are at Beards Theology and Reconciliation. I still do not have a beard, but my name still is Dahadi Lewis.
Jorge Mendoza.
Stephen Lee. Glad to be here.
Beards.
Glad to be here. Do have a beard. It'll be here through the spring. No, through the winter. Yeah. And then I give it a little break.
You keep rocking it during
give
the
it
summertime?
Give a little break. Just a little style change. I know Jorge is committed to it, like James Harden. Just try something a little different. Might go to goatee.
See, I'm committed to this because that's all I have.
Looks good, man.
That's all I get.
I think you should do the no mustache. The no mustache with just the
Give it a shot.
Yeah, no mustache.
Try it, dog. It's hot. It's hot.
I think people that don't remember Ebert on Sesame Street.
Nah, it's hot. You gotta. Have you ever tried it?
Like I always think about that. Like
have you ever tried it?
I've never
you
tried
should try it.
But like I already don't have any facial hair.
Well, Roberson did it.
So when I do that, do I take this?
No, you leave that and just
leave this and
you shave that.
Okay.
Yeah, just try it.
Yeah.
See what Angie thinks.
All right, we'll try it.
Yeah,
maybe try it. So today we're going to be talking about entering the mission, right? So it's the third movement, and we're really hitting on this idea of Jesus being led in the temptation. The text is Matthew chapter 4, 1 through 11. And what's interesting is that there's three kind of major points that come out of it. Is that first is that Jesus was led into temptation into the wilderness by the Spirit. Like this wasn't something that like Satan got over and he won. No, like he was led into the wilderness by the Spirit. Second thing that kind of, when you think about this is that temptation is usually most effective when we're in our most vulnerable times, right? And then the final one is that we see that all the temptations Satan suggested were intended to bring about immediate satisfaction.
Yeah.
And I think that one really hits because we are a microwave culture. We are kind of a right now type of a people. So, when we think about that, doesn't it seem like temptation always comes as you're going into ministry? I mean, this was really key for me because we made the commitment to go to Plant Blueprint Church, and like all my family were healthy. My dad was healthy. We just saw a Laker game. Everything was good in the spring of the year, and it was literally the Lakers are in the finals. I never forget June. And they lost that game. Yeah. And then I got a call later on that night and saying, your dad just was rushed to the hospital. Here I am. I'm about to go into ministry or go into planting Blueprint Church. And that was June of 2008. My father died September of 2008. And I was now in full-blown residency in Little Rock. And I saw my dad pass before me, and I was just like, man, I'm entering into ministry, and it felt like, man, this was like the hardest time in my life hit me, as I'm going in. And and I've heard those types of stories happen to people countless times, over and over again. And, and so this chapter was really kind of a personal one that I've felt, as it relates as one who has experienced this. How have you guys seen kind of the challenges of that different planners or pastors or people who just have this burden to see something happen in their neighborhood? It seems like as soon as they kind of commit to follow, to wanting to do it, like something tragic happens.
Yeah. I think all of us, perhaps, I know I do, I think underestimate, just the enemy's really are the enemy's desire to destroy us. And obviously God's in control, God's sovereign. And so whatever takes place, God allows providentially. But, that doesn't erase the bullseye on our back when we are seeking to push back darkness in really these places that Satan has kind of marked out as his territory. And so I think it's important. It's an important reminder. I think ultimately just, prayer being fundamental, just in terms of before we enter the mission field and you see Jesus, spending kind of consistent time with the Father, and Jesus is 100% God and 100% man. But again, I think it's just a reminder to us that for us to accomplish the things that God has called us to do, that we've got to be spiritually fit. And then I love, on page 68, we'll talk a little bit about it later, but just some of the concentric circles that you kind of mark out with me, marriage, nuclear family, missional community, and church. I often find that for planters and leaders, one of these areas is always under attack. Mm-hmm. I've often heard you say, when me and Angie are good, everything else is good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But when you and Angie aren't good, right, then you kind of see that ripple effect. How would you maybe describe a little bit of just kind of that?
Yeah, I mean, just that. I mean, it feels like, all hell could be breaking loose everywhere else. But if Angie and I are good, life is good. Yeah. Right. But it's when, all the blessings in the world, church is growing, people getting saved. Yeah. But then me and Angie are not good. It seems like, man, like it's rough. It's hard. And I really think that, again, we talked about it in the past. It's like authenticity is the apologetic of our day. And we cannot have what we do not. We cannot give what we do not have. That's good. And a lot of times, like, I'm just always been one of those guys that, like, I can't perform. Like, it has to be kind of real to me, authentic. It has to do that. And I think that is kind of some of the tension that you see people who have become professional Christians, and they're good at, performing on the public scale, but they're terrible in their homes. And so that's kind of where people have started determining, marriage first, this second, and just kind of putting those orders of priorities, because it's for people who many times are missing kind of the core, of what it is. And so I think part of that's the reason why God allows us to go through the kind of the purification process to really say, do you really have what you're saying that you wanted to reproduce?
Yeah, that's good. I think that's exactly right. And I think also it's shaping us into being, I think, effective shepherds and effective ministers, and being able to serve and to help others along. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul talks about these experiences that he had in his ministry. And he says, when we were in Macedonia, he said, we had the sentence of death upon ourselves. In other words, he says, we thought we were going to die. Mm-hmm. And we thought it was the end of everything. And he said, God put us in that position, Paul said, on the other side of it, so that we might learn to trust God who raises the dead and not ourselves. Yeah. And then secondly, he said, and that we might be able to comfort others with the comfort that we ourselves are comforted with by God. So as God takes us through those losses and those pains and those struggles, we learn, man, that he is mighty to deliver us from them. Yeah. And we learn how to sympathize and how to understand and wrap our arms around people in an authentic way, and say, man, you could trust the Lord in this, and you're gonna get through it. Yeah, I love what you said. You said, that God revealed that to Paul on the other side. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But so sometimes when we're kind of going through those experiences, you don't know why. Right. Yeah. Which is the difficult part of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's kind of how the text in 4:1 talked about it. It says Jesus was led into the wilderness by the Spirit. And you're talking about God leading us to these trials and to these things. I mean, and so it's not, again, that kind of God fell asleep behind the wheel. But so we know that this is a part of the training that is doing. So persecutions and trials are something that God uses for our sanctification.
Yeah. And I know we're going to touch on this later, but I think it's important to make the connection now between this movement and the movement where we're sent out, or Luke 4 and Matthew 4 and Matthew 10, right? Where the term ekbalo, and we'll get into it later, but Jesus was thrust out into the wilderness by the Spirit, and then later on he says, I'm thrusting out you, my disciples, out to be sheep in the midst of wolves. So there's a parallel between us as sons of God and the way God uses us and shapes us, and the way that God sent out his very own beloved Son.
Yeah, and and I think that is like that thrust out. Why is it important that happens a lot of times before kind of the official ministry begin? Because he comes out of this wilderness experience, and it says, and Jesus began to preach. So from that time, Jesus began his public ministry, and this happened before the actual public ministry of Jesus began. And so he's going through this refining, this authentication process on the front end before.
I think this is really, really good because it's something that you often talk about is, a lot of times as Christians, we define God's will by the path of least resistance. Mm-hmm. So if you're planning a church and everything seems to be going wrong, it may not, a lot of times you may interpret that, man, I better maybe slow up put the brakes on.
Yeah.
Or it could be, man, God is putting you in a season to where you're learning to trust in him and rely on him and just cast yourself completely on him.
Yeah.
And that is a good disposition to have in the beginning of ministry, rather than everything goes smooth and you develop kind of comfort and even pride maybe in what you've been able to accomplish, and that could set you up for disaster.
And that's really where, in that last one, it talks about most of the temptations that, all three of those temptations that the enemy put before Jesus, all brought about instant gratification.
Yeah.
Right.
Quick.
And as planters, we talked about it before. You mentioned it in the previous podcast back that you were like, man, in order to kind of establish family, aim for family, instead of just planting the church, it brought about some different realities, that we have. And we can always want to take the shortcut, the path of least resistance, in order to get numbers, get people in the seats, get building, get whatever it is that we'll put. But it's kind of like this process is like turn bread into, turn the stone into bread, jump off this, like in each one of those, like we have that temptation, to feel like, man, if we're doing God's will, we know God got our back.
Yeah.
It's kind of like God owes me.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing is we're trying to make God serve our agenda rather than us submitting ourselves and really serving his agenda.
I often think, I think for me, when I think, a lot of times whether it's church planners or ministry leaders, I think there's often just a unique personality imprint on all of us. Like we often believe what is impossible. I mean, I think God calls particular types of people to plant churches. And so I think one of the things that I often felt like in my own life is, I could have had a discussion probably before planning a church about how it would affect my wife, my family, my nuclear family. I would have perhaps internalized it, but not in a way that would have perhaps caused me to pause. And I love, what you just said, where I think the benefits I think that we see in ministry, I think in Jesus' ministry and Paul's ministry is really that God is patient to work with us in process, and that we don't have to be finished products, and that the Lord is really gracious and kind to use our entrepreneurial gifts and our passions, our desire to see what doesn't exist. But in the midst of that, I think what this book I think is really helpful to do is to give you a roadmap to say, okay, before I'm thinking about my church, and how's my wife doing?
I think that's really good because when we even talk about that persecution, it could be as simple as my wife's not feeling this.
Yeah.
Right. That's a form of suffering.
Yeah.
If wifey's not feeling it, and you just dragging her along.
Yeah, I'm like,
that's not a good look.
Yeah.
And it can, anything else. And I've seen so many pastors spiritualize and, and try to beat their wives into submission.
Yeah, she hates it. I'm like, nah, bro. Like, you ain't hearing Jesus.
And so, I mean, and so, Steve, why don't you just kind of wrap us up with that, just that thought, like what do we do when we see our family members suffering for the call that we feel like and we make that connection between our call has caused suffering to come upon our family? Yeah,
man, I think by God's grace, I think the woman that God gave me is probably very similar to, Angie, I know Wendy, is just very patient. I think she's been very patient with kind of my ups and downs, the seasons of clarity for me, and also the seasons where I'm like, Lord, I don't know where you're taking us. I think what I've hoped to model over the course of our 11-year marriage is ultimately where I want to be, I think, as kind of the head, the spiritual leader of our household, is really submitted to the Lord. Mm-hmm. And here's what I want, Tiffany, you to trust. And I think sometimes the challenge is to know that I really ultimately want to do what pleases him, but you're the neck in the family. So I'm able to kind of take the temperature of our family based on like, man, how, have we had date days, date nights, and how are the kids doing? Do we need to take a sabbatical and time away to rest? Andy Stanley has often said, cheat the church, don't cheat your family. And so that's just been a common practice, I think, in and our kind of our rhythms as a family is to say, at the end of the day, I think what my wife and my kids, my wife and my kids matter most. And that actually puts me in the position to be the best pastor possible if I'm loving them consistently. And so I think that's just an encouragement, I think, to pastors out there. I think your church will be healthier if you and your wife are healthy. Right. Yeah. If your kids are emotionally well and don't feel cheated on by the church, that it will actually benefit you as you minister to singles and the married couples in your church. So just an encouragement. Yeah. It's countercultural.
I love it. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you saying is to prioritize your family.
Yeah, prioritize
the family of God.
There it is.
Right, in your pastorate. And so, you
said that much smoother than I said. I like that. Maybe I need a book. I need a
book.
These brothers got a book. So actually, that's my book title.
That's your book title.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, good. Well, welcome. Thank you again for this time, and we appreciate it.
Pick it up. Among Wolves.
Grace and peace.
Out.